Hello everyone, welcome to SwitchUp and to another episode of our Battle in the Backlog series. In this series I take on my substantial backlog and try to clear off 6 games, giving you a roundup of my experience, a mini review of sorts if you like, and ultimately letting you know in my opinion if these games will be worth your time and money. So which games have been cleared from the backlog then? Well, let's find out. So the first one then, going back to about February this was Mario vs Donkey Kong. This of course was the remake for the Switch of the Game Boy Advance original and sees you playing as Mario trying to retrieve your mini toy Marios from Donkey Kong, who has stolen them from your factory in a fit of jealousy. This equates to small puzzle based levels where you need to navigate a number of obstacles and hazards to get the key and get through the door to continue chasing Donkey Kong through a number of themed stages. I finished this game including getting a star for each stage, which means getting all the presents, in about 5 to 5.5 hours. Completing it does mean you then unlock the new game plus mode, which does change the levels slightly in that you need to navigate one of the mini toy Marios through the same stages this time, which does change how you approach it, and there are some harder levels to unlock too, so there's definitely some post game content here. I suppose it comes down to whether you have the stamina to play some of the same levels again in a slightly different format. A fun game though, I did enjoy it, and definitely worth consideration for puzzle fans, perhaps when the physical edition starts to drop a bit in price. The next game I finished was Five Nights at Freddy's Security Breach. Now, I've never really been into the Five Nights at Freddy's games. I know they've developed quite a following over the years, and I have tried my hand at the original games, but could never really get on with them. This game is slightly different in that it's played from a first-person view, and sees you playing as a young boy that's trapped inside the pizzeria as the animatronics turn rogue. This time Freddy is on your side and you can find him at times to help you in your quest of trying to escape, and there are a lot of stealth segments as you try to get through each hour of the night through to the morning when the pizzeria will reopen. This means battles with the other animatronics, and it does pay homage to the earlier Five Nights at Freddy's games in the way that some of the battles play out. You'll get yourself locked in certain rooms at points, needing to use the screens to keep the doors locked and keep those animatronics out, and you also use the security cameras to your advantage when hiding to see where they are. I will say that as the game went on it did become quite frustrating at times, especially with those stealth mechanics. There was a stage towards the end that had me pulling my hair out. I must have retried that stage, or that hour I should say, so many times. And the final segment of the game, it does that thing where it artificially breaks, if you like, the save points so you can no longer use them, and dying on that meant watching quite a long cutscene and then taking on a QTE over and over again, which did become really annoying the more times you died. I don't know why they couldn't have started the save point just after that. Also, in terms of the Switch version, I can only comment on this particular version, there was a particular segment of the game, I think it was Roxy's Raceway, which was effectively broken at times. The walls would disappear, the floor, the whole scenery would turn to black, the save points would stop working, not as part of the game's plan this time, and you have to visit this place a couple of times, so this did become a chore just trying to force your way through the game and not have it fall to pieces in front of you. A strange game really, hard to recommend despite the fact for 75% of my time I really did enjoy it, but those bugs and a few difficulty spikes here and there do stop me from wholeheartedly recommending it. Then a big one, I'm quite proud of this one actually, I finished Vampire Survivors. Now, when I first started playing this game, I actually first started playing it with Mark on his console. I hadn't played it before, we played it in 2-player, and I thought it was really quite fun. Then it went on sale, not that it's expensive to start with, but that was the final little push I needed to pick this one up. And I didn't really expect it to have an end point. I was expecting it to be a high score chaser of sorts, where obviously you're trying to survive as long as possible within each of the levels, but then it became apparent to me that there was a way of completing the game. So I started to research into this, what you had to do, and it's quite a convoluted process, involving picking up a number of relics and doing other bits and bobs, but I did manage to finally do it all and complete the game, and it took me roughly 25 hours, which for about £3 that I paid for it is incredible value. And I believe by the time you're watching this video, the newest free DLC will also be releasing for this game. This is unbelievable value, this game. It's such a good, intense game when you start to recognise the evolutions of weapons, and what at first feels like a completely impossible game where you'll just survive for as long as you can, a bit like Tetris say, where it's inevitable that you'll die at some point, you start to realise that you can get to that 30-minute mark if you start to build your weapons right. It's probably an acquired taste to a small degree, but for the price you're paying, it's one of those that you can take a punt on, and I absolutely loved it. Had I played this last year, this would have been well up there as one of my games of the year on Switch, but a fantastic game, and I'm very, very pleased to have finished it. The next one was finished for review. This was Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles Wrath of the Mutants. Now, I've said many times on the channel, I'm a big fan of the Turtles, always have been, going all the way back to the 80s. They were the in thing when I was a kid. It was almost impossible not to be a fan if you were born in the time that I was. And I did like the 2012 show that this particular game is based on. Plus it's a beat 'em up. Beat 'em ups are probably pound for pound my favourite type of game. So it seemed like a match made in heaven. It's based on an arcade game that came out in 2017, which again gave me hope that this would be very good, but it doesn't feel like an arcade game at all. It hasn't got an attract mode, it doesn't have any sort of pizzazz about it that makes you feel like you would have spent money on it back in the day, albeit obviously it came out in 2017, but it just doesn't have that feeling to it. And owing to the fact that the character sprites are in 3D, it also messes up how you plant your attacks in terms of moving up and down the plane. This is quite important for beat 'em ups. It's something some people wouldn't really give much notice to, I do appreciate that. But if you're into beat 'em ups, it does mess up your timing, and it makes it feel more like a complete button masher than anything that involves any sort of strategy or skill. Boss fights are also very similar, although I did like the amount of variety in terms of the characters used. It was nice to see so many characters put into the game. But yeah, they all had very similar movesets, and the game just lacks that spark and addictive quality that good beat 'em ups have, and there are a lot of good beat 'em ups on the Switch. That's its other problem. Still, it's nice to finish it. It took about 2 hours. I wouldn't recommend this game at the price that's being asked. It would be a heavy sale for me if you're going to pick this one up. I'll probably pick the physical version up as well, just because I am a Turtles fan, and it will be one for my collection. But yeah, I'll be waiting for a massive discount for that to happen whenever it does happen.
We got pizza! We got pizza! Yeah! Pizza, pizza, pizza! Yeah!
Then another massive one in all honesty I wasn't sure I'd ever finish. That was Cuphead. Mark and I played this through in co-op and we finished it one night, and the feeling of just sheer relief and complete elation of finally finishing this game was unreal. It is an incredibly difficult game. Now obviously that's nothing new, many people have said that before, but it's strange in that you do start to become accustomed to its difficulty because of the move patterns of each boss, and learning those patterns, even if you are still dying, it starts to become intrinsic in the way that you move, almost as if hardwired into your brain the more you play, where you do start to feel like you can do it even after each defeat. Then of course you move on to a new boss and you have to start that process all over again, which can be quite deflating, but if you stick with it, it can be done, and it feels great when you do it. The final boss was actually probably not the hardest boss in the game, strangely enough. In terms of its patterns, there was a boss I found much harder, but it did feel like the most unfair. Not completely unfair, there were still ways that you could dodge attacks, but there were certain times it almost forced you into a corner by way of having an attack coming either way that almost felt unavoidable. It's such a great game though, and I just love that art style. I'd love to see a sequel to this game. Obviously there is the DLC, the fantastically named Delicious Last Course, which I have played a bit of and I do find quite a bit easier. I do think the introduction of the new character Chalice helps with this, but yeah, a full-blown sequel at some point would be absolutely magic. And the final game completed then, this one almost by accident. This was Felix the Cat. Now this comes on a compilation of the NES game, which is the one I finished, the Game Boy game and the Japanese version of the NES game. Sometimes I do this with games, I say I accidentally finished it. I mean, I always play a game with the intention of finishing it, but this is one I started up for one of our interesting games videos. I'll put a card to that in the top right hand corner, and it was almost, before I knew it, it was finished, and I didn't expect to finish it that quickly or in one sitting. And mainly because obviously it's an NES game, you kind of had that spectrum of NES platformers in terms of difficulty, and whenever you play a new one that you haven't played before, you always wonder exactly where it's going to sit on that spectrum. I must say this one does sit quite low down. It's not particularly difficult, but it does have some nice ideas about it, and it was definitely fun to play. I think it had 9 worlds in total, most of those having 3 levels each, so a very similar structure to something like Super Mario Bros, obviously with boss fights in the last of those levels for each world, and the worlds changed as you moved along. You had some of the standards of back in the day, such as your underwater levels, ones in the sky, ones in space, tropical islands, etc. And there were a couple of levels actually that really reminded me of Super Mario Land on the Game Boy. One of the underwater levels where you were in a submarine, or at least could be in a submarine, and I'll explain what I mean in a minute. And there was a level in space where you were in a small starship, again reminded me of one of the 2 side-on shooting levels from Mario Land. What I meant about potentially being in a submarine is that each time you collected a power-up, it changed the way you moved through the stage. So on levels on land, you start just walking, of course. You become the Felix the Cat with the magic wand and the hat on after picking up 1. Then you became a plane and then a tank. So obviously underwater the process went on until you became a submarine. So it could be you didn't ever get to that evolution and you stayed as something else. But this brought an interesting angle to the game because it changed the way you fired your weapons, obviously gave you extra hit points, and it felt a bit like Adventure Island in this because on some of the later evolutions you had a timer before they ran out. So it was quite an interesting mesh almost of a few different platformers. I think the digital version goes for about £20 or your regional equivalent, and the physical, unfortunately, in my opinion at least, has been picked up by limited run games, which means it's not as readily available, certainly not in countries outside of the US. And I don't think it's worth that price. It's a decent game. Only took me about an hour and a half to finish though. Again, I'd be waiting for a sale on this one, albeit I would recommend it in terms of its gameplay. So there you have it, another 6 games off the backlog. What did you think of these 6? I'm actually quite pleased with these ones, I must say. A couple of big, difficult games in there, and some others that it's nice to just check off and move on to something new. Please do let me know of any games you've completed lately. I always like to read what other people are playing and how they found the experience. And don't forget, if you are looking for eShop credit to pick any of these games up, you can use our website switchup.gg to get your eShop cards, and doing so will get you 5% back in cashback that you can use against a future purchase. There are also links down there to some physical stores such as PlayAsia, and codes down there to save yourselves a bit of money, and some of these are affiliate links, so it does help the channel out. Thank you if you do use them. A quick thank you to our patrons and our channel members for your continued support, and to each and every one of you for watching our videos. Take care, and until next time, happy gaming.